Hey everybody, I'm Ted Price from Insomniac Games. On today's episode of The Game Maker's Notebook, I sat down with one of my favorite people in the industry and a teammate of mine for over 15 years, Bryan Intihar. Bryan is the senior creative director for the SpiderMan franchise at Insomniac Games. He and the team just shipped Spider-Man 2, which is currently the fastest selling Sony published title on the PlayStation 5. And we had a relaxed and freewheeling conversation where Bryan shared what it was like to helm such a hotly anticipated title. He was very open about the lessons that he learned as a creative leader, including the importance of letting experts be experts. He related stories from development where the team dialed in what was most important to deliver a relatable cast of characters. And he shared more about how Insomniac's relationship with Marvel has blossomed into a unique and very strong friendship over the last decade. Please join us.
We have to talk. This is something else. I need your help.
Are you sure this isn't something you can handle yourself?
I'm sure.
Miles, this is crazy!
We call it a symbiote, and it chose you.
Get it off of him! Ready for your annual physical?
I'm the hero here, not you.
What the hell's going on with Pete?
You're not yourself.
You want to join us?
He's here.
Lock down the whole building!
I know I can snap him out of this!
We can fight this together!
Bryan, welcome.
Hi, Ted.
Right?
I'm back.
It is awesome to have you back on the show. It has been several years, and the last time we talked, you had just shipped Spider-Man 1.
Yes.
Now, Spider-Man 2 is out. It has gotten rave reviews. It has been the fastest selling PlayStation 5 game from first-party studios. How's it feel?
It's a great question. People ask me that a lot. I want to say I'm super happy. I think it starts with being relieved because we work so long in these games, and there's such a buildup and an anticipation. So I think now I think I'm entering the happy phase. I think for a while it starts out. It's just I'm really relieved that game came out. It's being received well. You know, it's as you said, it's getting some good historical things going on with the sales. But end of the day, fans really seem to be happy. The team is happy. So that makes me happy. That makes me go from being relieved to being happy.
Well, it's awesome to hear that. And for our listeners' benefit, you and I talk all the time. So, yes. And I probably should remind people that we're teammates. So Bryan and I have worked together for many, many years.
I have all the dirt, everyone. I have all the dirt. So there you go. Just tweet at me. I'll give you all the dirt.
What are you talking about? But one of the things I do know is that we've both been through, and that any developer has been through, is that roller coaster ride leading up to launch. What is that like, and for you, and having been since you're a veteran of many, many game releases, how has it changed for you over the years?
I think over the course of time, it's kind of similar to the actual development of the game, and how from being a CD on the first game and being a CD on the second game, I think there's that you're coming to the end, you realize this is like the final moments of being able to make the game better, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's that period where you can actually do more damage to the game. I remember closing down Spider-Man 2 and starting to bring things up that, because I've played the game so many times, you almost when you edit a paper and also now you've been editing it so much, you actually make it worse. I think I was starting to give notes that were making the game worse. So you have to basically at one point trust your project leads say enough is enough. It's time to let us just get this game done and actually step away. So I think what's changed is just the trust level and throughout the entire project of, whether it's trusting the team about a call that we want to make about, whether it's a new feature, an existing feature to cut a feature, listening to project lead, the project director, Jeanette Lee, and her saying like, listen, I think this is not worth doing. And then even listen to our producers, whether it's, on the Sony side or talking to Marvel, or even talking to people like you and Chad and our senior leadership team at Insomniac. Because sometimes even when my job is to have that big picture review of the game, I still have somewhat of blinders because I'm so into it every day. I need that fresh perspective. So I think the big thing that's changed is the level of trust, and then when you can kind of like let go. And that's weirdly kind of scary, that moment where you realize like you're done. Like people are still working on it in terms of like making it more stable or more performant, but you giving notes has to stop because it's actually going to make things worse. And it's probably one of the most vulnerable times you have on the project because it's out of your hands at this point. There's no more. And, for us, that was kind of, as we were working on that patch, like, okay, Bryan, you got to stop. And I'd like to say I've gotten better at stepping away. I have my ups and downs on that front, but I do think that's the biggest difference is the trust at the very end, but also then throughout the project, learning to really listen and trust.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I think that's a journey I know that we're all on. Anybody who's in a creative leadership position, right, is trusting. But you mentioned something else that I think that's a tough one for all of us to as leaders to deal with, and that is helping others see the same pencils down point, right? We're craftspeople. We love making things that are just highly polished. So how do you communicate that to a team when you've got a game that's like on the verge of being fantastic and you feel like we could polish forever?
I think you pick and choose your battles. I think you look at, for us, and Insomniac, since I've been at the company for now over 15 years, we always talk about the first 90 minutes of the game. Yeah. We always talk about that. Like if we're going to pick and choose where we're going to put our time, we're going to look at that because that first 90, the first 9 minutes of the game, first 90 seconds of the game, we talk a lot about, we don't want someone to say after 6 or 7 hours it got good. We're talking like after 6 minutes we've gotten people. So I think there's a game like SpiderMan 1 and SpiderMan 1, Miles, Ratchet, SpiderMan 2. Obviously there are longer, bigger games than that, but I think just in terms of what we make on SpiderMan 2, you can't hit everything at once at the same level. It's impossible. I think that's unfair to the game. It's unfair to the team. And so I think you have to say, what are the things that people are going to notice? Like, obviously we knew the first mission of the game was Pete and Miles fighting a giant Sandman. That we want that to look really good, not only from a playability standpoint, because we're training the player, but also just this big epic set piece that we want to start the game with. But then you look at, okay, what are those missions? What are those moments that are really important to the player experience? Whether that's things involving the symbiote, obviously traversal with being such a big part, the addition of Brooklyn and Queens. So you kind of, in a way, as I'm talking to you, it kind of reminds me, it's like you just go back to your pillars, go back to the pillars of the game and go, is this going to help support the pillars or not? And we use the pillars all the time, whether it's scoping decisions, creative decisions, and then at the end, it's like our polish decisions. Like what is really, as you probably can imagine, we put a lot of time and effort in those final stretch into the symbiote tech. Whether it was in a cinematic, whether it was in the player ability, whether it was in Venom, that was a priority. Now we could have spent time on other things, but that was a big thing. Same thing with like, when you make a game that's in the Marvel world, story is really important. So we put a lot of time in, the cinematics and making sure that our characters look good and the lighting looks good and the audio support, the effects, so But, there's going to be content that's going to get, I'll call it a limited amount of extra attention. But what I think is, it's scary when you say that, especially when someone says, hey, we're not going to work on that anymore. And I say that with an asterisk because, like, believe it or not, the team finds a way somehow to squeeze a little bit more out of something, a little bit more time. But I think it's hey, it's okay if it's good to go. So I think it's really about picking and choosing your battles and using the pillars to hopefully help make you confident. And those are the areas that you're gonna polish.
Well, let's talk about those pillars because it's useful, I think, for anybody who is involved in a production or maybe is in your position as well to hear what other teams' pillars or X statement or whatever you want to call it are. So what were the pillars for Spider-Man 2?
Yeah. So for Spider-Man 2, we had 4 pillars. One was when best friends collide. It was obviously the idea of Peter and Harry and, the Spider-Men colliding with, so it was our story pillar. We want to make sure that, at the end of the day, we're always putting our human story up front. That we pretty much any game I ever will work on, this I guess is a spoiler. The first thing will be probably around the story because I feel like that's actually one of the first questions the team asks. What is the story of the game? They want to know. They want to know why we're building what we're building. What's the motivation of the characters, the world, the hero, the villain. That's a big thing. And then it was one was the ultimate Spider-Man was basically built upon our foundation of traversal and combat to make you not only feel like Pete and Miles more than ever before, but to also kind of make them feel like some of the best playing characters you've ever played. Like there's so many good games and you don't even have to look outside the PlayStation family to look at that, to get that feeling. And we wanted to kind of build upon it. So we looked at the idea of the slotted abilities and the web wings. That was an example of we didn't want to start from scratch. We wanted to build upon it. And then I think the next one was kind of that feeling of a summer blockbuster. And when you work on Marvel, you not only expect great story, but you expect those epic set pieces. And we said, how can we take our set pieces and really leverage not only the fantasy of being a superhero world, but taking advantage of the hardware and the SSD. So and you see that right away in the beginning of the game with Sandman is, those same seamless transitions of in and out of buildings, or with the lizard, in above and below ground, and getting the way that the entire experience happens in this one arena. And if you look at the lizard fight, it starts underground. They bust through the ground. They chase through the city. They go up a skyscraper. They crash down back. So it's kind of takes place across the whole city. And that kind of feeling you would imagine if you went to go see a Marvel movie, that's what you would see. And then we wanted that feeling of a Marvel movie kind of blockbuster moment that takes advantage of the hardware. But on the gameplay design side, we kind of looked at the feedback we had gotten from previous boss encounters, and we said, how can we make the fight evolve design wise over time? So how can one phase feel different than the other? How can we add more of a challenge, a challenge and mastery kind of, the way I kind of looked at it, I don't really think I really ever said it a lot, but was like Zelda does a really good job of that. They do a really good job of the first phase is this, you master it. And then all of a sudden they add a new wrinkle and they added that. Or obviously, if you've played some of the From Software games, they do that very similar to that. We're not making Elden Ring level difficulty, but that kind of that design direction. And the last one was the open world, really pushing more of a cause and effect. I feel like Sandman does a really good job of hitting all the pillars at once because we wanted to see more cause and effect. The example I give in Spider-Man 1, we have this really cool mission where you're chasing Martin Lee on the Inner Demons in this helicopter chase. And it ends with this really cool moment of the helicopter being webbed up, right? Well, Ted, if you just, after the mission's over, if you turn your head, the helicopters go on the things. There's no aftermath. So we wanted to see more of a cause and effect, see how things left an impression on the city. Developer talk. The second mission of the game has been called Aftermath. Like we actually call it that. We want to, so we take you through that area. But there's other things, like we have this really cool moment. I think it's like the fourth mission in the game, where there's this big fight on a boat and it gets overturned. And if you go back there after that area, you can still see the boat overturned and see kind of more propping. So it's kind of that, more of that cause and effect, and having the city really feel the impact of the moments. And then secondarily, but just as important, is when it came to our optional content, making sure there's narrative attached to everything.
Mm-hmm.
We realized, it was really, we didn't want things to just feel like a collectible or a checklist. Whether it was the spider bot, collecting spider bots, or the Sandman crystals, or the Stereo challenges, there's a story that builds over time. And sometimes it pays off in a big boss fight. Sometimes it's a big story revelation. So it's kind of really more of that cause and effect and wrapping narrative. So it's really, it was our story pillar, our open world, our world pillar, our kind of, I'll call it our spectacle pillar, because for us, there's so many great open world games. As we thought, like, hey, one thing we can do, because we're making a superhero game, is how can we push more linear game-like spectacle in an open world? That's something kind of, I feel like we've kind of pushed on to make our open world feel unique and different from others. And there's many great open world games. And then lastly is our hero pillar, because me and you both know we stress the hero and the controls and that feeling and that fantasy of being that character so much. And, I would say Spider-Man 1 pillars line up very similar to that. Sorry, that was a really long answer.
Oh, it's great. I mean, having insight into what the pillars were and how they are manifested in the game I think is really useful for anybody who isn't involved with a specific production, because
And I really think like 3 to 5 pillars is the max. Like, I think you ask more than that, I think you're asking the team to either remember too much, or you're just kind of saying, I really don't have a clear vision of what's really important. And I think that's unfair to the team. And that's what leads to really hard decisions or confusing decisions when you have to make decisions during the game, like whether it's scope, whether it's priorities. So, I think, I tend to go with 4, because I think I like those categories, and I try to stay in those categories if I can. And I think that helps the team stay focused, and they have a clear understanding of what we should be doing, what is the big picture, and what they should use to make decisions, and not just decisions like when they're in the room with me, like when they're in the room by themselves, like they're, whether in the department meeting or leads meeting, or, working on a mission, like they should know that well enough that they don't need myself or the game director, Ryan Smith, or Jeanette, the project director, to be in there, because they know those already.
Yeah, it's a great point. I got to say, I remember long ago, before we started making Spider-Man games, talking to Jacinda Chu, who is the art director on the project, and she used the pillars as a way to take emotion out of decisions often.
Yeah.
Because we all know when we're talking about something we're passionate about, often emotion can cloud our judgment. And it's really nice, and she was pointing this out to me, that when you can have clearly defined pillars that allow everybody to sort of be objective about why we're doing X and not doing Y. So,
well, Jacinda's really smart, and that's a great, and you kind of forget it does really kind of make it a little bit more objective. Just kind of, it doesn't really, because to say game development isn't emotional is a lie. I think it is very emotional. I think we all sit here and we put a lot of time and attention and love into this. We put a lot of ourselves into this. And I think that, but you do need that clarity, like, I think back, I can't believe I'm telling the story. I remember when there was one part in the project where we realized that the back half of the game we weren't going to make it. Like, we weren't going to hit the quality bar, and, we had it wasn't, I'll say heated, but it wasn't heated like we were arguing. Like I was like frustrated that we weren't going to get everything done. And I remember it was our Sony producers. It was Mark, Ara, Grady, Joe kind of saying, guys, we're not there every single day, but we see it. And Jeanette has confirmed it. Like we're not going to get all the way there. And I had a really, I will say, an emotional reaction to that talk. And then I stepped back for like 5 minutes. And I remember as people were talking on the Zoom call, I was just like scribbling down how we could basically, if we cut these things, how we connect it all back. I was just made it objective. I'm like, does any of this stuff impact the pillars of the game? No. Can we reconnect these pieces with minimal rework or, because you don't want to make a scope decision that creates more scope, right? Because that can happen times too. And you just did like the napkin sketch of what it could do. And I was like, and then 5 minutes later, I'm like, all right, let's go. After having that emotional reaction, because, we care a lot. But I do think Jacinda's point is spot on. It does make everything, it adds some clarity when probably your head is not as clear as it should be, if that makes any sense. It's funny. Sometimes you'll have this long discussion and then someone will say the word pillar and it's like the fog is removed and now you can go make the decision because you're like, it's that clear. Does it support it? Yes. If it does, great. If it doesn't, forget about it and it's okay. And in that moment, you might have that emotional reaction of like, how could we do this? But when the dust settles, you realize it was the right decision.
I love that analogy. Yeah, the fog clearing. It's in some ways that's sort of being creative within constraints, right? When you establish those constraints, it actually speeds things up quite a bit. So
that's actually my favorite part. Some of my favorite parts of working in games, like when we are faced with a decision that comes out of either a critique or scope or like something is like in the worst moment you have, the best moment comes out because you work with the team to solve it. It's weird. Like, I don't want to say like, oh, look for the worst parts of your project because that'll become the best parts, but it is really like doing that little, kind of sketch of like, how could it all connect back? Like that was fun. Even though I hated the conversation we were having at the moment, I hated it. It was fun to kind of take the puzzle pieces and like, I always say like there's game like that kind of stuff is like a puzzle piece, but you realize you have all the pieces, but they don't quite fit. So then you start shaving parts of the puzzle to make it fit again. So it is a very stressful time, but also can be a moment where you can kind of make the game better, but also then grow in terms of being a better problem solver. So when down the line, when there's more things come up, that you can kind of tackle tackle that issue that comes up.
I agree. And I think that is relevant to all aspects of any endeavor, creative, business-wise, right? Just those moments where we're sort of forced to rethink our own reality.
Yeah.
They're scary. And man, is it hard to take a step away from those things that we thought were going to work out perfectly because we still think they're going to work out perfectly. Yeah. But if at least I see this in myself too, when at some point when I can do what you just said, which is, okay, take a deep breath, let the anger subside, look at it differently. Yeah. And work with others. The solutions are always better. They really are. Right?
Something I thought a lot about from going from Spider-Man 1 to Spider-Man 2 is, in many ways, people ask me like, what's it like being a creative director? And, obviously the answer I give is like, well, you're responsible for the creative vision of the project, right? That's the boilerplate version. But like, there's so many sub levels. And I think what I've learned is one of the things learned about, hopefully what some people say a successful creative director is, you have all these voices coming at you at all times, all of these voices coming at you. And I think those voices are never going to stop. Like when you work on something like Spider-Man 2, where there's a ton of people working on it. There's a lot at stake. There's a lot of people, a lot of stakeholders. you're gonna have all these voices in there. And I think what I've kind of realized is, if you say to yourself, well, no, it's just like, I'm going to tell everybody, I'm never, stop talking to me, I'm just going to tell you what happened. That's not reality. What I've learned is, you got to learn when to listen to what voice. When's the right time? And so I always say, like, there's three voices that you're constantly always going between. You're going to, first is the team. What is the team telling you about the game? Like, what is the team telling you? In many ways, like, for example, like Josue, our design director on Spider-Man 2, he was we had talked about the idea of all our open world content and how you find it. And he was, at one point, we're in this meeting and he's like, guys, this is really important. Here's why. Give me a week to prototype something. And he prototypes more of the visual cues of the world. And we go, and like it went back to the open world pillar. So I was like, okay, I listened to Josue at that moment. Then there's times where you listen to your project leaders. And I think a good example is when Jeanette and Ara were helping us kind of have clarity on what we were going to do for the hands-on preview, or when the Sony producers were saying, hey, you're not going to make it based on this back half of the game. There's some things. And then I think as a creative director, there are times where like you have to listen to your gut. There are things when people are telling you it's not going to work, or they're not sure it's going to work, but you know it's absolutely critical to the game's success. Even it's kind of like when everybody's telling you no, you're gonna hold firm and go, it's gonna be okay, and here's why. And have some go down, just have a little bit of faith. Can't do that with everything. You can't say everything, but there are moments where like you got to listen to your gut and say, this is something that's really important. It's gonna take a while to get there. You might not see it right away, but when we get there, it's going to be the right decision. You just can't do that for everything. You got to pick and choose what those moments are. But I think really being effective creative director or any type of leader on a game, or even hopefully anything you do for a profession, is finding the right time to listen to the right voice.
So let's talk about those moments that you're bringing up when you're hearing this can't be done. No, this isn't going to work, or this isn't the right direction. And in those battles that you've picked in the overall war, how do you get people on board as soon as possible so that you're not waving your hands and saying, oh, just wait, it'll be fine, which nobody ever wants to do, right? What's your approach to make success there?
I can tell you the first one was opening the game with Sandman.
Okay.
I said three things before I even knew really the true game. I was like, we're going to open with Sandman. We're going to have the web wings, and you're going to feature Venom, and Venom is going to be playable, which is probably another thing. I think you have to. God, I feel like I'm going down memory lanes. This is. I'm going to get to the answer. I promise.
Okay.
So I'm in my mid-40s. When I started working professionally, I grew up in a time where you were told something and you didn't question it. You said, yes, sir, no, sir, I will be on it. And as I've gotten older, I've learned, and for good reason, which I wish I had been able to, is answering the why. Mm-hmm. Answering the why, right? That's really important. And it's something I think we've talked about a lot is, it's the pendulum was too far of yes, sir, no, sir, whatever. Yes, you're going to do it, right? We had the answer. Now, I feel like the next thing I've learned is one of the hardest things about, it's not one of the hardest, how do I say this? I think, like I call it the next step of leadership is, in my opinion, for myself, is how do you motivate a team or a person to go beyond what they think they can do? Like a great coach or a great teacher that I've had throughout my life. Like how do you get someone to go beyond what they think they can do? But the method at which you do it gets them to go beyond what they do. And then they wake up next morning going, I want to do it again. How can you do it in a positive light? So those conversations about a Sandman, something that someone may say, this is going to be really hard, or I don't know how we're going to do it. how can I explain the why, tie it back to the pillars, but then do it in a way where I don't say, well, you're doing it because I said you to do it. That's terrible.
Right.
Just wait. It's going to be great. That never works. You go back to the pillars. You go back to the why. I go back to Sandman. I go, okay, well, we want a threat the game's called SpiderMan 2. There's 2 heroes for a reason. What's a threat that would require having 2 Spider-Men? What's something that right off the bat, within the first 25 minutes, people go, oh, that's a PlayStation 5 Spider-Man experience. And then just right. And then the third thing is one of the pillars is a summer blockbuster, playing a summer blockbuster that really takes advantage of the PS5. Like it all 3 of those things kind of tie together. And then you say like, well, we're not going to have 20 moments like Sandman. That's the opening of the game. We're always going to invest big into the opening of the game, Yeah. So I think it's that kind of stuff. Now, you hope that's enough. And some of it is you're going to say, hey, we're going to work on it for a certain amount of time, and then we'll make a call. And then some things you got to figure out how important it is to you how far you're going to go before you maybe pull the plug or go in a different direction. But I think I feel like example of Sandman is a good example of all those lessons that I've learned, sometimes the hard way, of getting people on board. And I'm going to say this: games are always, anything you make is really hard in terms of like, do we have a great story? Do we have great mechanics? Do we have a great world? Do we have great characters? But the most important thing is, do you have a team that is motivated? Do you have a team that's happy? And do you have a team that you've empowered to make things? That's the real challenge as a leader, as a creative director, and can you do it the right way? I can tell you, I've not always done it the right way in terms of like, I've made mistakes. I've said things that I was like, oh God, Bryan, why did you say that? But I've tried really, really hard to do what people have done for me. Like I know, like, yes, me and you've worked together. I can count how many times when we used to be in the same office. The joke that we always say about Ted, here's a little insider baseball. You can go into Ted's office and you can be really bad. And then you can walk out of there completely motivated to run through a wall to do it, and actually really have a little bit more work to do, because you are really good at motivating and explaining and getting someone really excited to be great. So
Thanks.
Unfortunately, you've set a really high bar to do that. And I've just tried to take elements of you and Chad Dezern, our head of creative, and John Fiorito, our chief operating officer, and Ryan Schneider, take all the leadership attributes that you've taught me and showed me, and now bring that into my own kind of leadership style. But I do think a lot of it is motivating, empowering, and I don't say educating, but like really clearly communicating to the team why we're doing something.
That's great. And you give me way too much credit, but I absolutely agree with you. And I see that daily, and I've seen it from you in the approach that you and Jeanette and Ryan Smith have taken in keeping the team informed with weekly get-togethers and with big discussions, your office hours, for example. I mean, one of the unique things that you and Jeanette and Ryan did was hold office hours. You want to talk a little bit about why that was important?
Yeah. So I will tell you the history of office hours. So office hours actually started because of the Sony Santa Monica. So we were meeting with the God of War team and the creative director of God of War Ragnarok, Eric Williams, who I think you know. Yeah. And we were a bunch of their leadership was at the studio, and Eric mentioned that he calls office hours. Now, office hours with him this is pre-COVID, right? He would have a certain time block where anybody could reserve time with Eric and they could do anything. I hope he's okay. I'm telling this story, but I think he's fine. Because it's really great. People could come and hang out with him, ask questions, play a fighting game with him and just kind of catch up. Obviously, now when we were just starting kind of Spider-Man 2, and then we went into COVID, we couldn't do that. So we said, and then I'll say for you, what you do is every day you do an AMA. And it was kind of taking Eric's kind of his own office hours, taking your AMA and kind of merging it to where at least once a month, sometimes, I think we did it once a month where it would be an hour where anybody from the studio, and you didn't have to work on Spider-Man 2. You could be on anything at the studio. Any Insomniac could come for an hour and just basically ask questions, and anything was on the table, like literally anything. I think it just kind of helped people hopefully stay informed, feel like there was no question that wouldn't be answered. I mean, you answer anything that comes your way. So we kind of took the same approach because I feel like just being very honest, being very transparent. And something I've learned, especially in Spider-Man 2, is being vulnerable. There are times where I sat in that meeting and said, like, I don't know what we're going to do. I'm nervous about this. It sounds contradictory of like what a leader would say, right? But
not at all. I mean, I just
I think in my head, I think back to 18-year-old Bryan,
sure.
Who's like, oh, they're in that position because they have all the answers and they're perfect. They never make mistakes. Well, that's not true.
Well, we're in a world where we see leaders all the time who are making mistakes, but not ready to admit them, right? That's what I think drives people crazy.
I think what I've learned is when you are vulnerable, at least my experience in Insomniac, and I think one of the reasons why I love working here is that the more vulnerable you are, the more the team rallies to go, we don't want you to feel like that. We're going to figure it out. So I think I think the team really appreciates that honesty, I hope, and that it's, like me and you were talking, right? And I know I've done a lot of press for Spider-Man 2, but the game is a team thing. I mean, there's a reason why one of the reasons we don't open with like directed by, created by, all that stuff. It's like, it's all of us did it. We all did it, right? It's an Insomniac Games production, right? With PlayStation and Marvel, like it's all of us, right? Yeah. So I think that it's just something I have learned. That's one of the things I've learned a lot is it's okay to be vulnerable at times, and especially even with a big group. It's okay.
I love you. I'm so glad you're saying that, because a corollary is not blowing smoke, right? I think that everybody in the development world is incredibly smart, and everybody tends to see through any statements that feel inauthentic, whether it's statements we're making about production or statements in the games, you name it. And what's great is that when you can combine, and I've seen you do this a lot, vulnerability with just being transparent, telling the truth. Hey, this is the way it is. This is hard, that we've got some huge problems we need to solve. This is a crisis moment, right?
Yeah.
And that's fantastic versus getting people just saying, no, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Oh my God. And then the world explodes. Yeah. Right. And I believe we've been there too. Right. And I will admit that it is, I've been in a situation where I thought everything was fine, and that's what I'm telling everybody. And then, oh my God, it's not. So but maintaining that, being able to continue to share with the team exactly what's going on is so important.
I do. And I do think there are times, not a lot, because I think it can kind of get old. There are times where you have to kind of, when everybody maybe is really down or like really unsure, you got to be that leader that goes, no, we're going to be okay. Like we're going to be, like, just hold on. We got this. Like, we're going to go arm in arm. We're going to go. We got this. Trust me a little bit on this. I promise we're not gonna fail. But you can't do that all the time, because if you do that all the time, it starts to lose its authenticity and belief of the team. So you got to pick and choose when you kind of give that, I'll call it that I'll call it like the rah-rah speech. And, you know, I mean, you know me, I'm very like, you know, I come from a sports background. I come from, you know, playing sports, and, you know, it's about getting people, let's go, let's just do this. You got to pick and choose those times, because if it's every time, it just kind of loses its impact. It doesn't feel authentic.
Yeah.
And so, but I think that's what great leader does. Is they know, they can read where we are in development, how important something is, to give that moment of like, okay, we need that pick me up. You just got to kind of be able to read the room and read the situation and when to do that kind of stuff.
Well, and what your perspective, right, as a creative director is really important, and it's a unique perspective because you are not responsible for diving into every single tactic that we are using. You're responsible for having the 10,000 foot view. So if you don't mind, share a little bit about what it's like and how you can maintain that 10,000 foot view constantly and understand where the game's going, where the roadblocks are coming up, and more.
Yeah. So I think a little bit so right now we have what we call, we have this basically this director group, and it's myself, it's Ryan Smith, the game director, Jeanette Lee, our project director, and then we have Bobby Coddington, John Paquette, Jerry, Josue, Doug, Jacinda, and that's kind of the director group. Now, I am very fortunate. I've worked with all those people outside of maybe 2 since SpiderMan 1. And I've worked with most of them even before SpiderMan 1. So we have a very close relationship. I know that, like, we have a shorthand that probably a lot of teams don't have in terms of director group. Like, we know each other. We're friends, which gotta be careful sometimes when you're friends, because you can, we can maybe talk about that later. And we are very transparent and blunt with each other. And we always try to make sure that we have a discussion before we have it with the team. And that if we are together or separate, we're all saying the same thing. And then, I'm not going to sit there and tell Jacinda how to art direct. That's a waste of time. And that's an insult to her. I am not going to tell Bobby Coddington, one of the most talented cinematic directors I have ever seen in my life, how we should put this scene together. I'm going to give him, if he asks for feedback and like what the intent creatively of the scene is, but I'm not going to sit there and tell him that, Bobby, I think you should change the camera. That's insane. So I think it comes from aligning with your leaders, getting on the same page, understanding, having, I call it, difficult conversations behind the scenes, so that when you're with the team, you're all united and on the same page. Something Ryan Smith is the game director. We try really, really hard. Like, our number one rule is never disagree in front of the team.
Mm-hmm.
You never try to disagree in front of the team, and we never argue in front of the team, because that doesn't look good, but it confuses people. I mean, to the point where Ryan and I will sometimes in a Zoom call have a side conversation to make sure that, hey, I'm feeling this, you're feeling that, we're on the same page, right? Because we want to make sure there's clarity and we're all in agreement. So I think really is about, I really think it's about trusting, communicating, and I don't know if I said this on Spider-Man 1, but I kind of realized it halfway through Spider-Man 1, and I've tried to double down on, is let the experts be the experts. Let the craft people do the craft thing. Like, obviously I'm going to give feedback on the big picture and play the whole game things, but like, I am not going to sit there and dissect a character model's genes with Jacinda. It's not. It's going to say something about it. It's not worth my time, because she has people who are way more talented and have a better eye for that stuff than I ever would. Right? You got to let people own what they do. That doesn't mean they can do whatever they want, because we have pillars, and we have tone, and we have overall direction. But gotta let people own it. And the more they own it, the more they want to make it better. At least that's how I feel. So I think my job is to establish it, empower, and then when push comes to shove, either motivate or clarify.
Mm-hmm.
You
That's
know,
great.
yeah.
Yep.
So it's a really tough job, but man, it's the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my entire life. I mean, it is when, and I obviously I've done a lot of interviews since we've shipped, and I always joke, but I really mean it. Is like I could go through every single mission in the game, and I can tell you a moment where it was going to be this based on either a creative pitch doc or whatever it was, and then when the team gets it and they make it so much better than everything, and that's to me success. Is you kind of establish a very high level vision or approach to something, and the team goes, yeah, thanks for the start, but we're going to even make it way, way better. And I could go through the entire game and call out multiple moments for each piece that happens. And that's what I'm really proud of. I hope it never ends with, well, Bryan had this idea and this is exactly what we did, because I think the game would not be as good.
Well, I think that as an industry, we've had to necessarily evolve away from that, because these giant games just cannot, at least in my opinion, you can't have an auteur approach to it, because there's just too much to do. And there's such a missed opportunity if you don't involve lots and lots of voices from different backgrounds and have people with different perspective to come up with something that's a heck of a lot better than any individual could do.
We've even gone beyond just like the normal animation director, art director, lead. We on Spider-Man 2, we started this thing called mission directors. Which to me is, like, process wise, was probably one of the best things we introduced on Spider-Man 2. Was we essentially, like you said, the games are really big. There's a lot of moving pieces. But the team needs to be able to move with confidence, clarity, and make quick decisions. So what we did was we created this position called mission director, where the closest I can think is, like, imagine like it's like an assistant CD, GD kind of position, where they are there to basically lead this piece of content from beginning to end, make decisions, give feedback, get the team together. And the great thing was, it could be people from all different craft. So it could be, we had designers being mission directors, we had writers being mission directors, we had an animator being mission director. So it wasn't just like, oh, it has to be a designer. Like we even had some gameplay people, gameplay programmers be mission directors. So that was what was great, is that so me and Ryan could meet with them, give feedback. So then they could also, now we still met with the team and the actual people working on it, but end of the day-to-day was these mission directors. And I think it really helped not only keep things moving forward from a production standpoint and moving things faster, but was really great was to see new leaders emerge in the studio. And really, like, for example, it was really awesome to see people really take off. And because it's not like, there's only so many creative directors and game directors in a company, right? There's just not that many, especially depending on how many projects you have. But we're always looking for who are the next leaders of the company. And something I've thought, and I've talked to you a lot about, is like, what's the next wave of Insomniac leaders? And I think something like the mission director not only helps make the game better, but allows us to see who has that potential and put them in a position where it's kind of like, we're not throwing you to the complete deep end right away, but you're in the water and, you're going to have to, paddle for a bit or start swimming. We're there if you're the lifeline, but it's, it's that next step. And it's been really seeing people really rise to the occasion. And it's definitely one of my favorite kind of memories, production memories of Spider-Man 2, is seeing these new leaders emerge. And making unbelievably great decisions, making the whole game better. Like we wouldn't be where we are without the mission directors.
Well, for anybody who would like to know more about how we look at mission directors, how can you give me the three most important qualities you think are necessary for a successful mission director?
Collaboration, communication, passion.
Okay.
You got to be able to communicate to people, a group of people, all different fields coming together and get them on the same page.
Yeah.
Just like what I try to do, it's not just your idea. It's the content will be better if you can get everybody to collaborate and work together to make it better. And you gotta get people excited. They're those like the dog days of development sometimes where it just can be like you're beaten. It's like you're not gonna be able to figure it out, and you gotta be that lightning rod, that emotional lightning rod for the team at times where go like, no, we're gonna do it, or like help celebrate victories, celebrate moments where you conquer. And I think that's, to me, now maybe that's a little bit of my trying to put myself into a mission director position, but I do think the people who have a level of passion, and that doesn't mean be rah-rah like me and be like all like, animated, as you can probably tell if you're watching this. I'm very animated, but do it in your style. How can you be passionate in your style? How can you be, so maybe not passionate. Maybe the word is
I think
authentic.
that's a great word, though. I mean, passion.
Or authentic. Like be who you are. Like, don't try to be me. Don't try to be Ryan. Be yourself. Because I feel like something I learned was I was trying to be certain people when I was first a creative director. And I was like, nah, just be yourself.
Yeah.
And I think having a level of authenticity will people. I mean, you said blow smoke, right? You don't want, people will know right away if you do it. So if you're authentic to who you are, people will respect that. But collaboration, communication are huge.
That's great. I appreciate you sharing. Now, you're talking a lot about our internal team, which is fantastic. But we also, and you referenced this earlier, work with Sony and we work with Marvel. And one of the questions I get a lot is, what's it like working with Marvel? And I know you get it 1,000 times more than I do. So what is it like? And how has the relationship evolved now that we've been working with our partners at Marvel for many years now?
Well, I was just with them yesterday. I was just with them yesterday, actually. Yeah. I know it. I think I know why the question is asked, because I think when we've all read the stories over the years about someone working with a brand or a license that maybe didn't go so well, right? Yeah. And I think maybe the history has shown, they're going to put some big constraints on you to do things. And I mean, Ted, you've worked with the Marvel team for a while as well, is at the end of the day, the most important thing, and this kind of goes with our Sony producers, like, it's about making great games. It's not about, well, the Marvel brand says this. Like, it's about what makes a great game. What decisions are we making that's going to help make a great game? We make big narrative choices like, spoiler, at the end of game 1, Kill Aunt May. The word, is this on brand, never came up. That never came up once. It was, is the death earned? That's exactly the same question we would ask ourselves, whether if we were working on a non-licensed game. Yeah. We would say, if we're going to kill a character, are we earning that death? Yeah. Is it set up for that? So they're asking us the same questions that we would ask internally. So I think yes, are they going to know things about Marvel that, even though I feel like I know a lot about Marvel, that they're gonna know more? Yeah, I mean, that's what I would imagine. Of course they will, and they're going to provide perspective on the history of the character, what things are really crucial to the character. But at the end of the day, they're also gamers. They're playing a lot of games. They're seeing what's out there in the market. We're talking about stuff that we're in a cinematic review, reviewing an early version of a cinematic. We're not talking about brand. We're talking about the arc of the character, the motivation. Does this communicate it? Like, which it's just another, I don't want to cheapen it, but it's just another developer-like voice in the room that's maybe coming at it from just a little bit of a different angle, or can provide a little different context. I said this, I probably stole this from you because I'm sure, because my best lines are usually stolen from like someone like you, is like, even though they are Marvel games in a way, I just think of them as extension of Insomniacs.
Yeah.
Like I don't think of them as, oh, it's Marvel. Like I just don't, because it's never been like that. We have a very close relationship. Like, we text each other. I mean, I'm texting them all the time. We're texting about what game are we playing? What comic did you just read? We're not talking about, well, brand said this. It doesn't come up. Like, obviously there are brand things. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say we don't have brand conversations, but like, trying to think of like contentious brand, we really don't. Like, not a lot. Nothing that would lead to like going, oh, this is a bad relationship. And I'll call it the quote unquote disagreements or arguments we have. They're the exact same ones we have internally. Yeah. So it's not any different. I can tell you, we argue a lot more internally than we do with Marvel or our Sony producers. Cause so like, I just think, again, it goes back to being respectful of the license, the brand, the characters, the world. I think it helps that obviously we have so many Marvel fans at the studio. But also I feel like one of the things I've always been very proud of being Insomniac is that we are very good collaborators. Mm-hmm. And we are not, it's not that we don't think we're perfect. We know we can always be better. And it's always good to get feedback from anybody or get a perspective from that, not just ours. And I think that's something you, John, Chad, Brian, Al, Carrie, and Ryan have established in all of us throughout the years. And that's just us extending that to Marvel. And I think that's one of the reasons why the relationship is so strong, and that it's very healthy, and that it's led to better games.
That's great relationship advice, really, for any developer who might be working not just with an IP holder, but just with any external partner. I'll give you a lot of credit, though. You and the leaders on the team have put a ton of effort into building those relationships. As you said, you're texting about things that aren't game related with your friends at Marvel. And I will give Marvel a ton of credit for putting a lot of faith in us, and also making an effort to build relationships with us. And it's a really great situation when both sides are equally inspired to get to know each other, right? Because it's more than a business relationship, isn't it? Right?
I think it is. I mean, I think it's a lot. I think it's a lot more. I mean, when we I'm very close with Eric Monticelli, one of the producers on our game in Marvel, and I think the relationship goes beyond just our Marvel games, right? I think we obviously all have we meet people that we work with and become close friends, but like Eric's a confidant of mine. Sometimes when I need that motivational speech, he's like, "This game's going to be great. You got this. Like, it's going to be great," right? I think that's something I know I really appreciate, having that outside perspective of someone that like Eric, like that I really trust. These games are really hard,
and
they're the emotional roller coaster.
Yeah, and I think that's where
everybody.
I agree. I think this is where if we talk about the stories that are in Spider-Man 2, and I say stories because it's a complex story and there's a lot going on with lots of characters. Those things tend to unite all of us who are working together across different groups, because they are meaningful, right? To all of us, and we and Marvel and Sony all share that desire to put something out there that's going to make an impact on players. And so when I'm talking to Jayon, for example, who runs Marvel games, we connect over that. We're not talking about business. We're talking about how we love the themes in the game and how we love what the impact it can have on players. So it's a really cool place to be. Sorry, I'm probably talking a little bit too much, so I'll go back to you.
No, you're spot on. I think that obviously I've told this story before about how important Marvel is to me since I've been a kid, and I feel like personally I feel like there's a lot of responsibility on me to deliver something like kid version Brian would be proud of, right? Because that's what I'm part of me is doing it for. So I think in a way, I think there's no more pressure that Marvel could put on me than I ever put on myself, or we put ourselves on, right? Because I care about the material so much. I care about, as a fan myself of this wanting to be really good. I mean, there's a reason why I walked into your office that day and said I want to be the creative director on these Marvel games, right? Because it's really important to me, not just as a professionally, but personally. So I think when it comes from that place, and then you have so many people like me on the team that are so passionate about it. The trickier parts of a relationship kind of work itself out because you're all coming at it from the right angle.
Yeah, that's a really great statement. We're all, again, unified sort of in what the game means. And I just want to shift over briefly to the importance of the story and the character arcs in the game. Every character you have, that you and the team have moved from Spider-Man 1 with our focus on Peter to now a game that has a focus on a much greater array of characters, and with tangled and twisted, not, I wouldn't say twisted in a bad way, but interacting emotional arcs.
Yeah, you can say it's messy because we say it can be like, and I mean messy, like you said, it's not messy and bad. It's just there's a lot. It's Jacinda asked me one favor on Spider-Man. She goes, "Could we not have as many characters?" And unfortunately, we failed and have more characters.
But it feels like, I mean, for me, and I'll say this, I think it brings a level of immersion and believability to the game because life is messy, right?
It is.
And I think you portray that really well in the game with Peter's and Miles's and MJ's, like quotidian challenges, Harry's as well, right?
Yeah, I think. Well, thank you. I think first of all, it's the team, it's the writers, it's the animators, it's the designers, it's everybody, and the whole team contributes to our story. And I think something that is why Spider-Man is my favorite Marvel character, and I think why so many is beyond obviously the cool powers and the suit. I think Pete and Miles are two of the most relatable heroes that you'll meet, and I think that what we try to do is show the relatable world and the relatable issues they go through as much as we do the superhero stuff. And you look at Pete and Miles, if you boil down their story, essentially is they have one foot kind of stuck in the past, and it's them in order to move forward. They don't need to forget about their past, but they need to move on, resolve their past. Before Miles can write the college essay, he needs to figure out this Lee stuff, and before Peter can move on with MJ and everything with the house, like he's got to take care of everything with after the loss of May, right? There's and I think that's something we all could understand. Something terrible happening in our past, and is it holding us? Is it preventing us from moving forward with our lives? I think you don't need to be a spider hero in order to have that journey, right? Same thing with MJ now dealing with JJJ and are making maybe choices you wouldn't make just to keep your job, right? I think you could probably find people who've gone through that, or Harry, wanting to, heal the world or make the world a better place. Like that's something you could imagine a lot of people have. Unfortunately, the way he goes about it is a little bit, different, right? So we try to make those relationships really relate, those stories and those motivations, something we can connect to. And I think, of all the best superhero stories that, whether it's in film, whether it's in TV, whether it's in comics, is that relatability in a world that sometimes is unrelatable. Obviously, when we look out the window, we don't see people in red and blue suits swinging through, skyscrapers, but what they do when they're outside their suit. Yeah. And I've always said, if we can make you care about the stuff outside the mask, you'll care a lot more about the stuff inside the mask.
Well, speaking of that, I think you and the team made put an even greater focus on that in Spider-Man 2, from the very beginning. And you want to just talk just a couple minutes about that decision and when you made that as a team?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest example of that is probably the Queen's mission. It's the third mission in the game where you pretty much play as Peter for half an hour. Just Peter. It's very little spider activity at all. Like he actually never, spoiler, never puts on the suit, but he does one sequence of spider stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it was we knew one of the most when the critical things of the game was we needed you to not only know Peter and Harry, but understand their friendship and pretty much, I'll call it, fall in love with their friendship. Like that was kind of what I said to myself, is like, how can we make you love their friendship and believe they're best friends and they have a history? So what we did was we created a mission where Harry and Pete go take a trip down memory lane where we're constantly going back and forth between the present day and the past. And they go to Midtown High and you see their relationship, right? And you see, at that moment after back and forth, you see the moment where Harry learns that his mom passed away. And then Harry starting to ask Pete, hey, I got something that I want you to be part of. We understood that if we can get people to love their friendship from that, I'll call it the first hour of the game, it's going to carry us through a lot of some of the stuff later in the game that, it'll mean more. Now, that kind of mission is very different from anything else really in the game. At one point you're cleaning up around Aunt May's house, you're riding a bike, you're running through hallways in a school. That's a big ask for the team to create non-spider stuff. And that's one of those things, that's one of those examples of like explaining the why it's important to that first pillar, that story pillar. And I think for us, it was, at least for me, I'll speak for me, it was how could we build upon what we did in Spider-Man 1 of having those non-spider hero playable moments. Like it was taking the Otto moments in the lab and supersizing them a little bit.
Yeah.
Whereas the Otto Pete stuff, you can imagine if you stuck them all together, it probably would have been the same length as Queen's, but it was something really early on that we felt that was really important. So I think it was pushing, like that's just one example of, I guess doubling down on those human moments, those non-spider moments to carry you through, whether that was that moment or the Coney Island mission,
right,
where they're bonding, and then obviously some of the stuff we did with Miles and Rio in the kind of the Harlem quest. Those are, I always like to say, we really want to have a 360-degree look at this universe, and I think we need to show that stuff. Even though like sometimes it isn't the most like quote unquote exciting stuff, but I do feel like it benefits the other moments in the long run. It's like a culmination of the whole experience.
For sure. And I want to acknowledge too that for pacing it really helps, right? One of my favorite parts is the Aunt May Foundation, and just the opportunity to learn more about Harry's dream and how Peter fits into it, and just lots of the little additional information that as a player you can use to flesh out the world. It's cool stuff, but it anchors, as you said, the events later in the game, and it makes them meaningful.
Yeah.
So I know, and I appreciate the team spending the time on that and really.
Yeah, it's weird. It's not weird. I'm saying so much of the game that I call is like a 10. Like you're moving. You're like you are Spider-Man. You are doing crazy things. You're fighting crazy characters, and you are just like, it is like you're watching like this big moment in a movie.
Yeah.
But if everything's at a 10, you're exhausted by like hour 3. You need that ebb and flow. And even like, God, this is probably, I don't know, I'll say it, whatever. Sometimes you'll like look at a UX test and that will be scored lower, right, than the roller coaster fight, right? Or like fighting Lizard, right? But you look at the story score and you're like, overall, like, I love this story. I love the Pete and Harry relationship. It's great. Even though the Queen's mission may have not scored the highest as like, but I don't think you get that comment unless you have that mission. And then from a pacing standpoint of just the ebb and flow of the game.
Yeah.
So if like, by the way, it's not a criticism of UX. It's super valuable. It makes our games better. But I think that sometimes you have to go beyond the score. You have to look deeper. You have to look at the whole picture. And I don't know if, I hope this is okay. I remember reading something about an Uncharted 4 mission where it didn't score as great, but it was about showing showing Drake, like, outside of being typical Nathan Drake, going crazy, but they felt it was really important to show him having a normal life. And it's kind of always kind of been stuck in my head is you got to have, not only from a pacing standpoint, but the overall experience that you want to deliver. It's not always just about the score of the mission, if that makes any sense. You got to look deeper at times. Now, you want that information because if it's like scoring really low or like the written feedback's really bad, you're like, okay, maybe we're not even achieving what we want to achieve here. But I do think you have to it's really important to look at it in the whole scope of the experience.
Yeah. It's great advice for anybody who's putting together a story-driven game, any kind of macro. That pacing and that emotional roller coaster is so important. So
Yep.
I one last question for you, Bryan, because you talk a little bit about players' reaction during UX tests. Now that the game is out there in the world and people are commenting on it, they're sharing their videos, they're posting screenshots, and it's really cool. What do you hope that players truly get from playing the game?
I hope that they say it's obvious that people who made this game love this game. That, yes, I could tell you that, it's always nice to see when they talk about, oh yeah, the boss fights are so much better than the first game, or wow, the graphics look even better, or like, man, this is so much more epic than the last time. Like, all that stuff is great. Like, it's obviously what you want, or like, oh man, the open world experience is so much better. And that stuff is great. And like, oh, the web wings are awesome. But if we have people just say, it's so obvious that they love Spider-Man, they love Marvel, and you can tell they love making this game. To me, that's the ultimate payoff. That's the ultimate thank you, I guess, to me. Because, some people are like, well, does it bother you when people give you like a ton of feedback, or like they're asking for like, why isn't this in the game? Why isn't that? I'm like, no, because it's worse when they say nothing. That means you haven't moved them at all. You've gotten no reaction out of them. That's worse. So, I listen, when you work on something like Spider-Man, you are going to get a ton of feedback, and you're going to get people who are like, I don't understand why this isn't the game or why that isn't the game. I totally get it. But if the general feel is like, this is something made for fans by fans. And the other thing is, if you're an Insomniac who've worked on the game and now you're playing it after the game's come out, that's also a good sign, because that means you actually.
I am.
Yeah.
I was not able to platinum it during development. I'm now trying to go for platinum.
But it's that kind of like, if you haven't, I need about another month before I can play it. I need a little bit of distance in terms of just being able to look at it, because I'll start going, well, there's a bug. But I think that's a really good sign too. When I see like our team using photo mode, I see our team really excited about what, oh, I didn't know that was in the game. Oh my God, wow, I found this. Whether you're on Spider-Man 2 or you're on another project. So I think that's a really good sign. But I hope that, I always look for if Marvel fans, Spider-Man fans, and Insomniac fans go, yeah, they really cared about this a lot. And I think that's the ultimate compliment.
Well, I want to highlight something you said, though. You also said you talked about moving people, right? And I think that I want to make sure I highlight, just as a player, there are a lot of moving moments and inspiring moments in the game. And it's, I know that for all of us at Insomniac, and I'm speaking for you a little bit, I know, to see people talk about how much the game had an impact on their lives just
Yeah.
through the themes and the relationships is also a really cool thing.
Yeah, and I'll give you one example of that. So we have a mission, and this I feel like this captures everything in a way that we just talked about, maybe even this whole talk. So we have one of our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man quests is where you can play as Haley. Now Haley is a character that we introduced in Miles. The Miles team created Haley. She's a Insomniac created character, and everybody on the team loved Haley so much we wanted to do more with her in Spider-Man 2. So obviously she has a larger role. She's more in the mix of the main story. There's obviously a relationship with Miles that grows over time. And during development, I believe it was Brittany Morris, one of our writers, had this idea of could we make Haley playable? Now I can tell you right now, there's no creative pitch from 5 years ago that said we were going to make Haley playable. Nowhere. Wasn't planned, wasn't the schedule, but there was a group of Insomniacs who were really motivated to make it happen, like really motivated. And so they did it, and they worked with constraints. They worked with constraints, and then they had people who just decided, hey, this is really important to me as an Insomniac, and they just kept making it better and better and better. And the Haley mission is incredible. And it's actually, you were asking when I stopped playing the game, I went to the office, and that was one of the last pieces of content I reviewed. I reviewed it with the audio team to make sure that we were being respectful of Haley, who can't hear. Or
Yeah, I was going to hope that context is important for anybody.
Yeah, sorry. So she's deaf, and we wanted to make sure that we were being respectful and using the information from our consultants. But this morning I was on, I guess it's called X now, and someone posted about her son had just gotten his hearing aids, and seeing Haley with the hearing aids helped. And that's what you say when you can connect on a beyond just what you probably expected the game to connect to for players. That is, you can't. There's no review. There's no sales figure that will match that kind of feeling that you can get. And again, that wasn't planned originally in the game. That was a spur of the moment. I have an idea, got people excited. Never really fit in the schedule, but the team was excited, motivated, and passionate about it. And my job is to see that, recognize it, embrace it, and support it. And just get clear of the way. And then if we had to make tough choices to maybe do something like, hey, if we're going to do this, we're not going to do that. That's my job. And again, that's an example. This game is better because of all the people who worked on it. And I can't be more proud of them, but also to be part of the team.
That's awesome. Thank you, Bryan, for sharing that. Thank you for sharing so much about your journey and the team's journey through this. It has been wonderful, as always, talking to you.
You're very welcome.